welcome to the Excellence Podcast. I'm Miles. Today I want to talk again about measurement. Now, last time we talked a bit about measurement in general. We talked about getting a good idea for what your actual situation is, doing some kind of threshold measurement to make sure that you're maintaining good practices, and then aspiring to some kind of goal. These are all various forms of measurement that are very valuable, but there's something that resides underneath the entire theme of measurement that's really a challenge, and that is the ability to measure the right thing. Now, measuring the right thing, there's a tendency when people do measurement, and I see this over and over again. There's a tendency for people to measure the stuff that's easy, and that makes sense. It's easy, it's fast, it's quick, you can do that. And often there are some pretty obvious measurements that can be done that are really straightforward. Now, when you're just trying to get your bearings, when you're trying to understand a circumstance or a situation, then honestly, those easy measurements are usually a good place to start. So take the stuff that's obvious, measure that, and what's going on. But sometimes there's an art form to measurement, and sometimes it's important that we learn and cultivate that art form, because there's one piece of understanding. There's the measure, and then there's the value behind the measure. Now, value is something you're going to hear me talk about a lot. It's a concept, it's a theme, it's a mindset that fits well with really establishing and building excellence. And that is that look, we're going to put all kinds of energy into all kinds of things, and that's fine. But whether that energy, and that energy is going to net results. It's going to produce some kind of result. The question is that result going to be what we really want to create, what we really want to achieve? We're going to achieve something. Is that achievement matching what we want? And that's where we come into identifying value, the value of a thing. In my time management example, because I had my own challenges with time management, where I was working 16, 17 hours a day, I needed to get, and I wasn't putting the time into the right things. I needed to get a real handle on my time. It was early in my life as a manager. Honestly, you can always tell, I get the feeling you can always tell the maturity of a manager depending on how well they manage their time. Because in the first couple of years, there's just never going to be enough hours in the day. And that's not because there's anything wrong with the person. It's because the job requires a different set of priorities, and you need to understand how to deliver value to time in a different way. As an individual contributor, you're part of a larger whole, but as a manager, it's more fuzzy. And so you really need to kind of navigate those waters and figure out your own paradigm, where you fit in that. That being said, you identify the value. You start getting to what is really a valuable use of my time. Now, the higher up the chain you get, the more important that becomes. So when you get up into that executive level, when you are spending your time doing something that is not the value that you're delivering, you need to delegate that. You need to hire somebody to do that. You need to bring someone in to do that so that you can focus on what you deliver your value in. But we're all the executives of our own lives. We're all the managers of our own worlds, of our own daily life. We're the manager of our own mind. And so in that, we need to identify where we're spending what is really valuable to us. So, value and measure. This is not a easy to grasp concept for some people. It was very difficult for me, for example, to really understand it. But once I understood it, it made all the difference in the world. I had a conversation recently. Last Thursday, I was on a panel. It was a 4-person panel for Human Resources Today. It was an online magazine. And in that panel, we started talking about team communication. We were talking about how to communicate well with the team and what to do that. And if you want to build a culture of rich communication between team and leadership, or team and strategy in the company, that you should measure that communication. But the question came up of how do you measure that communication? It's such a broad subject. And the actual thing is focusing in on what you think that communication is going to net you as an outcome. Value is all about desirable outcomes. Those desirable outcomes may or may not be related to the means in which they are achieved. So, for example, for me to be spending time as a manager working on my team, on their team cooperation skills, so that they can leverage one another and become a force multiplier, an exponential growth in their particular environment, to see that they can build more together than they can as a series of individuals. It's really valuable of my time to go and spend time working on that and building that team. It's less valuable of my time to read my email. I need to read my email. I need to take in all that information. I need to at least know what's going on. But as far as the real value of if you were paying me based on what I was giving back to the company, reading my email is a lower value priority. It 9 times out of 10, it didn't make any difference whether I had read the email or not. I'm glad I did. I had the broader context. I had all this information. Not to say it's not of value. I get in trouble for saying things like that. But the reality is that when you come down to brass tacks, when you come down to what is actually netting value for my team, for my company, for my friends, for whatever I'm working in, what's actually netting the value was not reading my email. What was netting the value was conversations. So I wasn't having a lot of time having conversations with people, which was really valuable and did move things along. And I was spending an awful lot of time, I was spending a disproportionate amount of time reading my email, which didn't actually net a whole lot of result, a whole lot of value. So what do I really measure? What I'm measuring is the time I'm spending on communication. That's the real good measurement in that example. Because that's actually the outcome that I want. Measure for the outcome you want. Don't measure just because of the data that you have available. Now, sometimes you may be constrained. Sometimes you may be stuck to, is this, this is the data I have available. What outcomes that we want can we evaluate from this data? That in and of itself is an art form. And if you get into program management, or if you get into any kind of logistics handling, or you get into anything where you're going to be a coordinator, there's an art form there. And that it can be really subtle. But when you're trying to identify what you measure is what's going to happen to your environment. If you're measuring your home life, the kinds of things you measure are the things that are going to be given focus. They're going to be optimized to. The human brain optimizes to whatever it's measured against. It's part of our primal makeup. And so what we will do is we will look to success factors and we will try to find the way to optimize to those success factors. Sometimes that involves cheating. I'm not saying that I'm supporting cheating. I'm just saying that in our own brain, we will play the numbers. We will cheat any measurement used if we can. We'll find a way to fudge it. It will at least be considered. It may not be acted on, but it will at least be considered. And the best kind of measurements are those that when the measurement is given focus, it ends up, by focusing on it, it ends up increasing the value delivery. It ends up increasing whatever it is we want that outcome to be. Likewise, if we cheat, the best measurements, the ones that are really, really crafty, the real artists at this, make it so that even if you cheat, that cheat is, even if you game the system, that gaming, even that is a benefit in some way. Now that's artistry. That's craftsmanship. I don't always have that level of artistry. I admire it when I see it, though. But that whole system of, there are a lot of people who resist measurement. There are a lot of people who fight against it, talking about gaming the system. And those who are resisting measurement often are not dialed in to the value that a measurement can produce. This is something where it can be really tricky, because I've seen a number of cultural environments where the measurement is an old one, meaning the value that it produces was a value we were looking for 5 years ago, but it's been maintained and sustained. It's been preserved over time. And so we hold ourselves in a new world, in a new context, to old measures. Now, this is easy to see in a business context where managers come and go, or senior leadership changes over, or executives changes, but it happens in our personal lives too. We identify measures in childhood, how to make our parents happy, for example, and we hold on to those even when they don't make sense for the rest of our lives. I have aspirations, I have opinions of what is good and what is right. And these are opinions that aren't necessarily mine. They didn't necessarily originate from my own intellectual consideration of the facts and then arrival at an outcome. A lot of them I have reviewed, and I think it's very important. When you become value thinking, you do start looking at your measurements and you start identifying what it is that you're actually operating with. What is the measure that you're using, and is that measure actually valid? When you see it in one context, whether it's in business context or in creation, if you're a creative and you're an artist and you're doing great art, and you start measuring yourself against the quality of your own art or the purity of your own heart, the purity of your own emotional expression into your music, for example, or the tone of your voice, or the craftsmanship that goes into your sculpting or your fabricating or whatever it is that you're doing. You can always level it up. And the value, the measurements that you bring into those, they create who you are. They create what becomes important to you. Not just in your work context or in your family context, but in every context. And once you see it, once you see the impact that understanding the value has and working toward value, you can't help but do an evaluation in other areas of your life. And for me and for a number of others that I've spoken to and worked with, a lot of times it comes back to evaluating the measurements that we have left over from our childhood, the measurements that we have left over from our parents or from our upbringing in some way, from a teacher that meant something to us, or from the social pressures of others. The number of measurements we have that were originated by 12-year-old kids, all because of social pressure, pushed on us one to another. The measurement of our happiness in social media right now. It gets criticized all the time that Facebook, for example, you present a disproportionately positive view of your life. And this, sets an expectation that this is the way it should be. Oh, that's the measurement. These are the measurements that we're living with, because they're reflecting values that may or may not be ours. So I'm not saying that you need to change them. I'm not saying that you need to go and rethink anything. I'm not saying that you need to modify the measurements that you use in your own life. Being a good parent if you had good parents, was illustrated to you by your parents. And emulate that model by all means. Hold yourself to that value standard and measure yourself accordingly. That's great. But do it actively. Know what you're actually looking at. Don't be satisfied with this is the way it's always been. You may still preserve any measurement based on the way it's always been. Maybe because it's still relevant and because it still has value. But understand why it was originated. Understand the value that was built. When you understand the original context of some of the measures that get made, suddenly you start appreciating them more. And you don't follow them blindly because they're just some arbitrary cataloging of some data. When you understand the value behind a measurement, you can actually get behind the measurement and assess it and make the modifications in alignment with the value that it actually delivers. That is really, really valuable. That is really important. And that is at the heart of making a good measurement, making a strong measurement, a capable one, and one that's going to guide you to the larger success of your ambitions and your goals and your aspirations. It's a very subtle notion, and this ability to tie value and measurement makes all the difference in the world. In your own personal life, it shows you where meaning resides. And it shows you not just where your meaning resides, but once you've identified what that value is, once you've identified what's really important, it springboards you, it propels you forward through measurement into being able to achieve that value and bring it and manifest it and bring it to life. And that's what we're all about here, bringing excellence to life. And excellence is all about delivering value. And measuring value is how we can manage ourselves to make sure that we're bringing our best and that we know what we need to cultivate, what we need to modify, and what we need to embrace to make it happen. This is the Excellence Podcast. I'm Miles. That'll do it for